Okay, well, it is 1:01 p.m. on my time, so we're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar. My name is Charlotte Stasio. I am Merit's Emergency Management Specialist for Underserved Communities. I just want to thank everybody for joining us today for Merit's Emergency Management Webinar Series. And this one's titled How Private-Public Partnerships Can Better Serve the Underserved. And I again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. I know we have a lot of familiar faces on the call today, as well as folks joining us for the first time. And welcome. Thank you so much for your interest here, or those of you who are watching a recording after the fact. Thank you for checking that out. And we do always like to make that available to the folks who participate, so you can check that out after the fact. And please feel free to share it with your colleagues. I wanted to let you all know that there are captions available during this session. We are using the Zoom platform. The Zoom platform has a auto caption function. You should be able to see that on the lower portion of your screen. It will say captions or transcript, and there's a little CC icon there that you can press to get some captions if you need them. In the spirit of accessibility as well, I'll just do a quick visual description of myself. I am a woman with light skin, dark hair. I'm wearing a Merit t-shirt with a Merit logo in yellow, and I have an image of Philadelphia behind me. All right, and so also want to let you folks know that we are going to be taking your questions throughout, but within the last 15 minutes, we're really going to try to dedicate that to the Q&A. So you should be able to submit that down there where indicated, the Q&A button on the lower portion of your screen. That's what we're showing on our screen share there. So please do submit those, and we'll love to hear from you, and definitely want this to be an interactive conversation. Want to hear from you folks. So before we get started, I wanted to take a moment to pause and just give a thought to the communities across the country, across the world that are being impacted by disasters and incidents, people who might feel like they're forgotten, as well as the first responders, law enforcement, military partners who may be involved in the response and recovery efforts. Thank you for allowing me to do that. Well, our guests today are back. We have Andrea Davis and Valerie Haven back with us today, and we're so glad to have them back. And we're going to be talking about a really important topic, which is preparing your public-private partnership, or P3 as it's sometimes known, preparing your P3 plan to make it work for underserved communities, to better engage them as we practice emergency management. Now, we know that this is not a new topic to many of you here attending this webinar. Some of you, and maybe many of you, have been in roles like incident commanders or public information officers or PIOs. We have whole community advocates. We have folks who are experts in floodplain management and meteorology, healthcare providers, or even small business owners who have an eye towards preparedness. So we know that you folks know what P3s are, and that you may have even built them yourself. But what we want to do today in our conversation is build on the demonstrated success stories and where we know P3s work, and build on that to empower our underserved communities. And so I also wanted to acknowledge that any P3 agreement that we create is going to be shaped by our unique geographic and demographic characteristics, as well as the hazards we face. So as we go throughout, like I said before, please do submit your thoughts throughout our conversation here to let us know what P3 means for you and where you live and work. Are there any businesses that have been part of your P3 plan that you didn't expect, or that surprised you with how engaged they were, what they were able to contribute? And how does the changing hazard landscape that we're facing now, with the impacts that we're seeing as far as extreme heat and flooding and all the other things that we're seeing more and more of, how does that change our thinking about these partnerships? And then crucially, finally, who isn't part of this P3 conversation that we need to include to actually improve whole community resilience? So we're really coming to you all today with that spirit of knowledge sharing and collaboration. And we know we have some real experts as attendees here, and we really want to hear from you, and I'm hoping this can be a productive conversation for you folks. So as I said before, we're rejoined, very grateful to have rejoined from our session back in June on building trust with underserved communities, Valerie Haven and Andrea Davis. And they have been at the forefront of empowering underserved populations in emergency management for decades. So I'm going to let each of you introduce yourselves, but since we're back, we have an opportunity to know a little bit more about our panelists. So Andrea, introduce yourself, and maybe you could tell me about your first ever job. What was your first ever job?
Ooh. Okay, well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming back, and hello to first timers. My name is Andrea Davis, and I am the president and CEO of the Resiliency Initiative, which is a women-owned small business that focuses on helping other businesses and communities with their resiliency. I've been in emergency management since 1999. So my first incident was Y2K. So going back a little bit, my career has been kind of split down the middle. I spent 10 years with the private sector, as with the Walt Disney Company and Walmart as their heads of emergency management. And before that, I was with the federal government and even on the local level in different capacities. And then I've been a lifelong volunteer for the American Red Cross. So I feel that emergency management's in my blood a little bit, Charlotte, but I didn't start out that way. So going to your question, and this is very appropriate since my dad's on the webinar. Hi, Dad. My very first job was working in my dad's restaurant. It was a mom and pop diner called Andy's Cow Patty Palace. And I was 10 years old and worked Saturday mornings. And back then, all I ever wanted to do on a Saturday morning was watch cartoons because we didn't have them any other day but Saturday morning. And in fact, I went and researched at the local library child labor laws to see if there was a way that I could not work on a Saturday for my dad. And the laws at the time said no, I had to work for my dad. But taught me everything I knew about being nice to humans, waiting tables at 10.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. Oh, absolutely. I think everybody should work in a restaurant or food service. I think it should be like a draft, it's like your service that you have to do before you get into other careers. Thank you for sharing that. And Valerie, I want to give you a chance to introduce yourself, but I'll pose you another question, and that is, what's a role that you've had in your career or just in life that has made you a better emergency manager?
That's a great question. Hello, everyone. I'm Valerie Haven. I have my own consulting business. It's called Redefining Bravery, a whole community emergency consulting. I do whole community consulting, obviously, but I specialize in individuals with disabilities and those with access and functional needs. I've been working in emergency management probably about 7 years. I graduated from the Massachusetts Maritime Academy in, I think, 2019. I'm the first blind person to earn a degree from there, which is pretty exciting for me. And I think that, actually I have been always heading in the direction of working in emergency management. I think that my experience of becoming blind very slowly is what framed this pathway. We found out when I was 8 years old that I was going to become blind, and the doctor thought it was going to happen pretty soon, but it didn't. And so throughout the years, as I grew to adulthood, I would get a job and then I'd lose vision, and then I get another job and lose more vision. And what happened is that it kind of kept me moving forward, but it also brought me in connection with a very large group of diverse people in different kinds of life situations. I also became homeless in 1990. I was homeless actually only for 3 months, but it was a very long 3 months. So my experiences of having a lot of difficulty trying to manage my life and supporting others did help me on this path. And also, my family and I were traveling in an open antique car during Hurricane Agnes. My father did not know that a hurricane was coming, and we got caught outside. We were out in the hurricane for about 8 hours. So I don't really think I can point to one specific event in my life. I think over time it's been a culmination. And the gift of what I just said is that I now have a very large skill set, and I'm able to communicate with many people in different kinds of ways, which has helped me tremendously in my work and also in my ability to help others.
Valerie, thank you for sharing that. I think that really just goes to show that the lived experience can inform so much of how we see the
Yeah.
world. And I think that you have an invaluable skill set there with being able to engage people with various lived experience. So thank you for sharing that. And again, for both of you, I'm so glad that you've joined us again. And so let's move into our discussion here. We have some questions for y'all, but we can take this conversation wherever it goes. But to start out, I think again, we all kind of know, most people in this call know, public-private partnerships are just mutually beneficial cooperative arrangements, could be formal, informal, between organizations in the private sector, public sector, or some permutation of that. And let me throw it to Andrea here, if I can first. How would you expand this definition in your own terms, given what you've seen in the field? How can we change this definition to update what you knew?
Well, my number one recommendation for any emergency manager, and it's regardless if you're private sector or public sector, because in a time of crisis, we're all in this together. It's going to impact us differently with what you're working with, but redefining a public-private partnership to the needs that you're going to have in a crisis. So spending a lot of time on the front end. We talk about, developing these public-private partnerships for that response, for, when the bad day happens. But think about it from the lens of on the good day. You still need these partners in your community. And it could be that small business, and you think about the small businesses and how critical that they are to your community. I mean, just from a national level, they're making up 43% of our GDP. And so a lot of times from our planning, when we're looking at a hazard mitigation plan, how many times have you gone out, local emergency managers, to your small businesses or to your churches and to your other nonprofits throughout your community? How many times have you reached out to your big businesses, your Walmarts, your Targets, your Home Depots, and all with in mind for leading to the bad day? But if you take it from the front end and really look at it as you're going on a treasure hunt of your community, to know the resources that you will be able to find and be able to have, hopefully, to support the whole community when the bad day occurs. That's my number one recommendation, is try to integrate before, and especially with your planning, and just walk around your community and get to know who's there. And then you can also start seeing your gaps and where you might have some vulnerabilities and where you're going to see that you're going to have to give more support. And then how are you going to fill those gaps? How are you going to get additional resources? I started out, and I mentioned in my intro, Charlotte, but my first incident was Y2K. And I know it seems rather ridiculous now, but my first job in emergency management was working for a small nonprofit in San Francisco called San Francisco Card. And it was going out to nonprofits and helping them develop their continuity of operations plan. And in the event, the world was going to end because of Y2K. And obviously that's good planning sense, because though the world didn't end with Y2K, there's a lot of hazards out there that all nonprofits should be planning for, but making sure that they can take care of themselves and then linking them up to the city so they could understand city resources when something happened. And then the city knew what resources were out in the community. Language translation, care facilities, sheltering opportunities. This would not have happened if they had not invested in somebody going out and helping them develop their plans and knowing their whole community. Think about that if you added businesses to it.
Valerie, I wonder if you have anything to add there. I love what Andrea was saying about it, thinking of it as a treasure hunt. What's out there that you can use in a positive way? What's your perspective on that?
I agree with Andrea. one of the things that I spend a lot of time working on is being present and paying attention to the language that the different organizations use. When you're trying to get cooperation from businesses and sometimes private organizations in a community, each one of those organizations has their own agenda and they have their own language. And I've had a lot of experience where there's been miscommunication and mistrust because one person would walk in and say, well, we have to do this now. But first of all, they don't know what the now is or what the we have to do this is. And secondly, they don't necessarily realize that the decisions they make for their own businesses or their organizations has a tremendous impact on what's going to happen next with a disaster or a crisis. I worked for a while meeting grassroots organizations. My job was to go to the grassroots organizations. These were mostly the support organizations for people from other countries who were they had newly immigrated here. And my role was to talk to them about their members with disabilities, to find out if they need support, if they had the services they need. And basically what was said to me by many of them, why should we pay attention to these people? You know, why is it important? And they didn't mean that in a harsh sort of way. They were not hearing, and I was not hearing what they were telling me. So in their communities, they deal with their disenfranchised people differently than Americans do. So it took me a while to get the hang of that and to understand that, first of all, I need to be respectful of their communication system and their power structures, and also to understand that they may not realize what support is available. And again, and the biggest thing for me is that they may feel that I'm telling them that they have to do work and they have to get resources they don't have, when actually where I start my work is by asking them first, show me what resources they do have, because they do have resources. They may not think of it that way, but they're really there. And even if it's just to protect their assets and their profits, they're still there. And when I start from that perspective, the groups tend to become more open, and they're more likely to talk to their community partners.
Love that. And I think it's such a great perspective to say, look at all you're already doing. Look at all you have in place that can be used when this hazard occurs that we're talking about. Right. And I just wanted to throw it out to the audience again. If you folks do have questions or comments, please do drop them in there. We'd love to get your engagement with that. I know you all probably have your own examples or stories of the successes that you've had out there. So we'd love to hear that. And again, Valerie, thank you for sharing that experience you've had. And I wonder if you've got a story or maybe something that's happened that you've seen where a partnership that was made proved to be effective in an emergency or in a disaster, where it sort of bore fruit, the partnership that was developed.
So there's an organization that works with the Asian population here in Boston. There's a very large Asian community here in Boston and also the surrounding towns. And so I was talking with one of the community grassroots centers that the coordinator knew somebody in his group that was visually impaired. And I was talking to him about the Massachusetts Rehabilitation Centers for the Blind. And he's like, well, that's not going to help. And I'm like, why not? He said, well, because he'll never become sighted again. So he didn't realize that I was talking about support services, because I knew he wasn't going to become sighted again, but he didn't understand that there's other ways to work with rehabilitation. So once I got past that, we were able to talk about providing evacuation techniques and finding ways to look at what the potential hazards are. This area actually was in a flood zone. And if someone doesn't swim, or they don't have enough vision to realize that there's running water near where they are, then there needs to be some system put in place. And we were able to do that. Once, the coordinator of the agency understood that this wasn't about making him better visually, but about making it possible for him to be safe and to evacuate quickly.
I love that. I love how it was on the. I just think it shows a great example of listening and working with a person and their individual needs. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
For that story. Yeah. And we have a question here in the chat from Stephen Lopez. Stephen, thank you for your question. And this one looks like it's directed towards Andrea. And this is kind of getting to what we're talking about, but I'll just throw it out there. What can emergency managers do to support private businesses to help them sustain in disaster? So what are the sort of things that they should be doing, in these blue sky times for when the disaster happens?
Hey, Stephen, good to hear from you and great question. So as far as a recommendation, leverage blue skies when you can, and go with the knowledge that most small businesses are just trying to make it through each day, and just for whatever they're doing, whether it be a restaurant or a daycare center. So knowing that time and money is something that are very precious commodities. So presenting your value proposition to the small businesses, and even the bigger companies. When you talk to your Walmart manager, outline, well, why would it be in their best interest to get connected with you today? Why would it be in their best interest to sign up for emergency alerts that could impact the community, and giving them that information? And if there's opportunities where it makes sense that they can participate in any of your tabletop exercises or full scale exercise. I know my tenure being an emergency manager in the private sector was with big companies, and I was fortunate to leverage that. But with the heart of the community being those small businesses, just finding those avenues where you can loop them in. Because a lot of times, like Valerie said, it's awareness. They don't know how they fit in. They're just trying to get through the day. And when the bad day happens, they honestly don't have the resources or the capability to even think, my local emergency manager, it's just not on top of mind. So just going out, introducing yourself, and having the information in an easy format where they could have it and know, hey, I met Stephen today. He's a good, connection for me. He gave me information. I'll give him a call. And for your bigger companies, if you hold like every 6 weeks, just community briefings, 30 minutes where someone can zoom in and kind of hear information about preparedness and how they can get better prepared. 9 times out of 10, Stephen, they don't have a continuity of operation plans. It's seriously just, we have to make money to keep our doors open. And when you look at any of the statistics that come out post-COVID, and how many small businesses had to close their doors because they didn't have a strategy on how to do business differently, is really challenging. And just the lessons learned that I had, I would say the opportunities presented themselves more so at Disney, just because with Walmart, I was there through COVID. But as far as developing kind of unique partnerships that you wouldn't think about, like Hurricane Harvey, we had a locally owned ABC station, wasn't impacted at all, but they wanted to get information out to the community. They're a news station, right? And so they're connecting with all the first responders, and connected. The Cajun Navy reaches out to try to and say, hey, we want to help. What does the Cajun Navy have? They had boats, so they put our reporters in the boats so we could be communicating, and we were the eyes for the emergency managers. And because we're Disney, right, we had other resources. We could do a telethon and raise money for those impacted, and plus we could do kind of different things. And if I could have just a quick aside, Charlotte, but I got to say one of my favorite lines ever in emergency management. I got to say, deploy the princesses, because we sent the princesses and Mickey to the Red Cross shelters to help out with morale. And if you have 2 minutes, Google it. It was amazing. Hurricane Harvey, Disney princesses,
beautiful.
and And then I get to say, deploy the princesses. But
No,
it's just an example of something you wouldn't think about. That's not a natural partnership. It was not formally done, but because it's a locally owned, it was a news station, right? Who knows your community better than a news station? So get to know them. Get to know those
right.
as an emergency manager. They'd love to have you on and be able to read schools coming, talk school safety. How do you prepare? There's so many opportunities if you're open to it. And I know most communities have one emergency manager, and this is the last thing you need is more things on your list to do. But there's so many opportunities there where you can make a huge impact.
Yeah, no, I love that story of deploying the princesses. I think that's wonderful. And it shows a capability that maybe you wouldn't think of as being available. And I wonder if quickly you could follow up with that, Andrea. When you, as an emergency manager, and you have these larger entities and companies in your community, how would you give them advice on how to navigate that the hierarchy that may exist within large organizations? You know, when you have places with thousands of locations and a large structure, what can emergency managers do to be savvy with that?
Number one recommendation, go and introduce yourself to the local emergency, their manager who's on site. Because a lot of times, and I can only kind of speak from my tenure at Walmart, a lot of times that local emergency manager has a lot of authority to do things for their community. And whether it give out goods or give out gift certificates, and especially when something bad happens. And that's the way we wanted it, because 90% of the US population lives within 10 miles of a Walmart. So you want to give that capability for that local emergency manager, but he needs to know who you are, and he needs to know who you are before the bad day happens, because everybody's asking for something after something happens, especially of the Walmart of the world. And I can imagine that's the same for the bigger companies. So know that local emergency manager. Just go and introduce yourself. And I saw a question in the chat, I think it was from Jeanette, about ICS and getting private sector to understand it. Jeanette, I highly recommend take a punt on it. It doesn't translate. So learn the language that's going to translate to the private sector. You're going to help them with their bottom line. You're going to help them get their business back up and running as quickly as possible during a crisis situation, and do the translation for them. Because I was not successful at Disney or Walmart talking ICS, and it's saying incident commander immediately sets people off, because everybody's a commander and no one's in a company. The CEO is always an incident commander. So figure out a way to integrate them into your structure that makes sense to them. And seriously, speak to them as that business owner. What matters to them most? So be relevant that way.
Valerie, I wonder what you might be able to say about how to make things in plain language, how to speak to the needs of business owners, of the underserved populations that we're talking about. What can we do in this sort of translation that needs to take place?
What I would love to see happen is for communities and local businesses to develop their own community emergency response teams. These are referred to as CERTs, and they're not used in the framework that we're discussing right now, at least not in the same way. But I would love to see communities developing their own teams. It does require a little bit of training. And I think that the private sector, they would have to give some time off or set aside some time for their people to train to be a member of this team. But what I think could be possible is that the teams could be activated either before or during a disaster, and they would know the specifics of the needs of the private and public industries. They could be a resource to help with the translation in terms of the communication. They would know where the things like water and other things like, all the kinds of things that we need. So I haven't talked to anybody into trying this yet, but I actually think this has some real potential in terms of being able to acknowledge what is available in the community, what the private and public sector brings to the table, or even just the private sector. If the private sector wants to set up its own cert and communicate with one another and then move towards the public sector, that could work in a lot of different ways. And we've been using this in a specific format for a long time, but I think it has potential to offer a lot to people that are not formally trained in emergency management, and would give them the skills and the language so that they could extend into the community and provide support at a completely different level.
It's a great.
Yeah, thank you for bringing up CERT. I've had the privilege of working with some CERT folks in what we do here at Merit, and the type of folks that it attracts are so passionate and are so just wanting to know all they can about preparedness. And I think that energy could be harnessed elsewhere. And if it could be an industry cert in one industry or another, everybody who works at the restaurants and bars in Philly has their own emergency response. That's sort of maybe it's not been done too much. Maybe there are examples that we don't know about, but I love the idea of it coming from the businesses themselves. And we have a lot of folks in the chat here talking about their experience with CERT. We have Irene, who said they do have a CERT for small business called BERT. I would love to hear more about that one day. And it is a great idea. I think we have so many volunteers that we can really activate, or people who don't know that they could be volunteers, or maybe they're not sure of how much the commitment it takes. I wanted to go back, pardon me, to a question from Patricia Frost, because I think this really speaks to what we need to do better as far as inclusion. Patricia is asking, what can we do to address the inclusion of children in our planning efforts? They're often left out in this whole community approach, or as we want to think about a whole community approach, they need to be included. They're left out when we don't take that whole community on. And Valerie, maybe I'll throw it over to you, because I know you've got probably a lot you could say on this one.
So it is very true that children are left out, and they're seen as part of the group of people that need to be taken care of, and that they don't have their own opinions and they don't have awareness and knowledge, which is not true. So I think that in this situation, I would want to recruit people that are caregivers and professionals that work with children, so that they could advise us and also gather children and set up a conversation with them in a way that would be comfortable, so we wouldn't scare them. But children they intuitively know a lot about self-care, and we can learn from them. So, we know the obvious stuff, like to create a quiet room, to have toys available, possibly even comfort animals if we can do that. But there's just not a lot of conversation about it right now. I mean, it's around, but there's no these are the young people, and we not only want to protect them, we need to make sure that when our attention is not on them, that they're safe and that we know what's going on. And just like with other disenfranchised populations we've been talking about, they have life experience that could be very useful in these situations. And I would love to see them be brought into the mainstream as a resource.
Thank you, Valerie.
Mm-hmm.
That's a great answer to that question. And Andrea, I wanted to throw another one to you, kind of building off that point when we talk about getting more diverse groups involved in our planning. What can we do to get the private sector and people who are in these businesses that we're talking about, or members of marginalized groups who run the businesses? How can we get them to participate in our exercises and our training and the things we do to prepare and practice before we have to go out and play in the disaster?
Oh, sure. And I just wanted to hit home what Valerie said about we have to empower children to really empower them with the tools to deal with a crisis situation. And there's so many opportunities within our communities. And it just ask yourself, do you know where all your daycare centers are? When's the last time you went and had a conversation with them? Just ask your employees where their kids are going to daycare. It's such a missed opportunity and they're so critical to our communities. Remember COVID, when everybody was sent home and then people had no place to take their kids. There were so many people who had to leave the workforce because they had no one to watch their kids because daycare centers had to close. And so think about how critical they are and that opportunity to train with them, help them with their plans, and then teach and empower the kids. And I think going back to your question, Charlotte, how do we get the private sector engaged? So how do you sit down with a daycare center that has got kids for 12 hours a day and say, hey, I want you to participate in this exercise? I think it has to be individualized. And I think you have to figure out your approach as that emergency manager. Hey, I know I have 15 daycare centers. I know they don't have plans. I know that they're going to need help, but they might be able to provide me help. And go and have a conversation and figure out a tactic that's going to get them engaged. Is there a way to have an information sharing session like Valerie suggested about giving the kids some tips, and there are ways to talk about really hard subjects with kids. We can't just not talk about it when we know that our kids are dealing with really dangerous and scary situations, sometimes on a daily basis. Use back to school as that opportunity to talk about emergency plans. Ask all, go out and have a list for parents. What's your school's emergency plan? How do you communicate when something happens? What's the protocol? What am I supposed to do as a parent? What do my kids know? Like developing those simple checklists that we're all really good at as emergency managers. We have these plans. We already have them. It's just making it more, it's translating it to that different audience. And then thinking about on that front end, well, what would it look like if I did, some sort of drill with daycare centers? What would that look like? And why is that valuable? Because that shows me as that emergency manager how this population is going to handle a certain type of hazard. That goes into your planning. That's invaluable. But I think you have to present first, what's that value add for participating? And say, hey, sign up. And I did want to go back to the one question about, some of the bigger companies, it's hard to find the right person. If you don't have success with that, the local manager who's on site for the big box store that you're working with, they have a me, someone who is in my role at Walmart or at Disney. Find them on LinkedIn. Just find out, do a search of emergency management, Walmart or whoever it is, and you'll find that contact and reach out that way. Sometimes it's cold calling, and I know that's hard, but that's a lot of times how you can start that conversation. And you might, hey, I can't represent everybody and say that you may get hey, I'm too busy to talk to you, or you get the runaround, but keep trying.
Yeah, it's definitely worth it. And I think in the chat, in the Q&A, we've had some folks talk about other businesses or other things that serve the community, like nursing homes, other larger businesses that they've talked about, or I should say nursing homes, congregate care facilities, skilled nursing facilities. I think there's so much great information that's being shared here, but I think you're so right, and find a way to speak on the terms of those businesses that you're trying to engage. Show them what the value is, respect their time, how tough it is in the ground state to keep your business going in a lot of ways, especially if you're from a marginalized area. With the last couple of minutes we have with some of the questions we prepared, we're gonna address more of your Q&As here in a second. But I wanted to turn this to you, Valerie. I know that that you're big on the technology piece of these things. So what I want to know is, how can we use new technology that's coming to the forefront to engage our citizens and our businesses in this, while making sure that people who aren't as connected or across that digital divide aren't left behind. What are your thoughts on the technology piece?
I was just thinking about that the other day.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of potential, but I have some concerns about how technology is going to work during a crisis because the infrastructure may go down. So some of the things that I've been working on are, like for instance, there is a cell phone that is being sold mostly to blind people, but it's very easy to use. It's got just a couple of simple buttons. There's other ones for, there's one called a jitterbug, which is not for blind people. That tends to be for older people that just don't have, they didn't grow up with our smartphones. So this is, it's a phone that they can use to reach out and to get help, but it's not complicated to use. So I think that we need to start looking at what kind of inexpensive technology we can distribute within our communities that will help people connect more quickly, as long as the infrastructure is intact. The other thing that I'm really excited to see happening across the country is that we're beginning to see the development of services for people with different kinds of life conditions that don't have the ability really to use technology the way that people growing up now are. So there's one organization where a very nice grandson discovered that his grandmother she wanted to stay at home, but she just didn't have the support system at home, and she wasn't able to reach out using her phone to get the things that a lot of people would. So he set up an organization where you can just use a regular telephone. You call a number and you can order groceries, you can get an Uber or a Lyft, you can hire somebody to paint your house, you can hire a dog walker. The whole thing is set up so that a person is able to stay in their homes if they wish and still have access to the support services while they're working other things out. I think that what we'll see happening in the next 5 years or so is a combination of new forms of technology that are easier to use, that are backed up by human beings, that will be able to be responsive immediately in the way that technology is not. We're coming up to the ceiling of what our current technology can do. And we're about to go through a huge revolution. The chat GPT and the artificial intelligence, that's just the very beginning of it. Where it could go in a positive way is that it's going to allow us to have more direct interpersonal contact using technology than we do now. Because right now, technology mostly is separating people.
Thank you for sharing. I love that idea of human-backed technology, and I think that is such an important piece that we don't want to leave behind in this. As AI, as all these large language models come to prominence, is they can't just be on autopilot. I mean, that's how I see it, at least.
Yeah.
And so we're getting to our Q&A time, but I was hoping that, and I'll pose this to you both, maybe just take a minute here to talk. What sort of tips or recommendations can you give to the folks attending this webinar that they can take and start doing once they get off this call in the blue sky times so they're planning? What kind of events can they do? How do they make them accessible? How can they engage the private sector and other parts of the public sector in their exercises? Andrea?
Reach out to your local chamber of commerce or Rotary, sign up to give a preparedness briefing at their next meeting. This will get you to a lot of small businesses and different members of your community. It's easy. It's a good win for you. Make sure that the information is relevant, speaking to that bottom line, to the business community, and have something to invite them to. They would love to come and tour your EOC. Invite them on a tour. See the behind the scenes that's going on to keep your community safe. That's a great, easy win and low, kind of low hanging fruit for you to do. And then as you kind of build that, have quarterly calls, invite them to your exercises, and then but always be asking yourself who's missing from the table, who aren't you seeing in your community that's going to need help in a crisis.
Yes. +1 on that. Valerie?
So one of the things that happens in the underserved communities is that if the people have been indoctrinated into like the medical system early, there's a sense among many of the communities that they will be taken care of. And that attitude is nobody's fault. It's a mindset more than anything else. So the private industries, yes, I agree with Andrea that it would be great if they would reach out. But the thing is that the other underserved populations have to begin to realize that they need to take care of themselves and they need to take care of one another. So what I'd like to suggest is that part of the outreach, I saw this a lot during COVID in my area, where they were trying to get people to go get their vaccines, and when people weren't coming forward, they started advertising that if you would come to like the Stop and Shop or you come to the YMCA and get your vaccination, you would get a $50 gift card. It worked extremely well. So I wish it wouldn't necessarily be that way, but it's if you can find what motivates the community, or at least part of the population within the community, and then work with that to get their attention and to help them understand that this is a whole community issue, that yes, we want to take care of each other, but everyone has a responsibility to keep themselves safe. And I would hope that they would want to keep the people around them safe as well.
Yeah. I think your point around the incentive is so important.
Yeah.
Kevin Holt, who's made a comment here about when you want to engage a private sector, tell them what the ROI is going to be. Tell them the return on investment.
Yep.
Why is it worth the time to do this? Why do you take time out of your day to do all the important things you have to do to prepare for something that we say maybe is going to happen, maybe not happen? But I think there is a clear case for what that return is. And so we're getting some really great questions here. Thank you all for submitting them. Please keep going with them. We're gonna pick out a few. I wish I could talk to them all. If you all had like 3 more hours, I would be happy to stay on, but we don't. So we are, let me go to a question here from, this is from an attendee who's asking, and I think Andrea, maybe you would be good to give me a few more examples of partners at other larger stores or companies. So we talked about like Walmart, Target, Home Depot, those like big box stores, but other things of that nature. What are some other ones of that ilk that we could think about?
I look at your kind of big community categories, like look at who's your top grocery store in that community, who's logistics as far as bringing in the different supplies, because you may not have one of these big box stores in your community or close to you, but so find out really who's going to be kind of the keeper of the keys as far as resources, and recognize like when as first responders shut off egress ingress into a community, what that impacts as far as supply chain. So kind of has some downrange planning of knowing where goods are flowing into your community, because if restaurants don't have a grocery store to go get the food, they can't open their doors. So you have this ripple effect. So really kind of knowing who's at the heart and the pulse of your community as far as the supplies. And because you need them, especially as an emergency manager, because your job, right, you want your community to get back up and going. But if a business can't open their door because they don't have goods, you can't get your community back and functioning as it should. And think of those core resources, your water supply and the power, from utilities and all that. What are your relationships with your utility companies? Who's supplying the water? What's the backup for them? And just kind of peeling back that onion. And really, to me, and just with my past experience, an underutilized resource is that local grocery store or food co-op, because they know your supply chain, and they're a lot of times those local farmers are the backbone of the big dogs of Walmart. And if a company hasn't actually researched their third-party vendors and how they're staying in business, they themselves can't stay in business. If you look at everything that was shut down during COVID, especially in your island states like Hawaii or Puerto Rico. Many of the big box stores relied on local farmers, but those farmers went under. They weren't able to support during the pandemic. So then that meant there wasn't milk on shelves, for days. And that's just a micro example. So it's really,
Yeah,
it's hard to be a local emergency manager, right? Because you're
it
constantly like
is.
pulling back this onion, right? And finding out like, who's my source for this? And constantly you're out there like hitting the pavement of finding out who I should talk to. And with all the pressure of your day job trying to write these plans, it's really hard. And I don't envy you. And obviously now I'm consulting, so I got out of the game.
I mean, no, we give it up to them, and I really appreciate you bringing up some of those other stakeholders that are part of this, the supply chain, our farmers, that sort of thing. I wanted to just bring back to a point that Linda Newman made here, where she said building trust with your community before a disaster. And in our last session, that was the theme, right? That's what we wanted to talk about. So I want to make sure we'll share that out with the folks who registered for this webinar as well. But that is just so very important. And the ways we talked about that last time was sort of what we talked about again today of listening and of going in and hearing what folks need from them. And Gus, great to see you there. Thank you so much for joining. We've got so many great people here on this call. We have a lot of people who are talking about medical reserve course, certs, things like that. Maybe Valerie, real quick before we go to our wrap up here, do you have any advice? Maybe this is summary of a lot of folks' points here regarding these volunteer programs. Like, what can we do to make these volunteer programs more inclusive if they already exist, or start them where they don't? How do we get more people to be the volunteers that we know they can be and be part of this, participation in planning and response and recovery?
Well, I like Andrea's, suggestion about going out there and, contacting them and, trying to create events. The first thing I like to do is just ask them to tell you their story. A lot of people want to hear the story. They want somebody to see who they are, and they want somebody to acknowledge what their life experience is like and how important it is. So, emergency managers are very good at being able to take that information and craft it so that it can become a training. It can become a talent. It's not just, and also there's a lot of people who are home, especially now after COVID. People have free time. They want to do things. And even if they just create a telephone chain, if they can't travel, you just need to think a little bit out of the box and look at the sustainability of the resources in your communities, and then use those to build a framework that these, unrecruited people can utilize and begin to come up with the resources that will help you. Because most people want to help, they just don't know how.
Yeah, I agree. I think most people are, where can I go? Put me where you need me to be when the thing is happening. And so I really love the comments that we're getting here. And we all thank you so much. I think we answered some really great ones. To just make sure that. Okay, Linda, you have another great question here about how it ties into personal preparedness. Like your local community center and non-emergency times partner with your grocery to provide snacks. People like free food. Maybe Andrea, real quick, if you have a minute to say about how this can tie into personal preparedness. Maybe that could be like a vector of engagement for P3.
Hands down, agree with you, Linda. People like free food. Any engagement I ever did or needed buy-in, I offered food. And so I highly recommend it. On your EOC tour that you'll be offering, have some snacks for folks. But I really think like right now, right, is a perfect opportunity with back to school, and kids are out shopping and getting all their materials for what they need to go to school. Preparedness should be part of that. And every kid should be thinking about like, well, what if something were to happen? And it can be simple and it can be framed, for their age group, in a fire, you want your kid to know what to do. So own that at your home. What would you do in your home if there was a fire? Where's everybody? How are they getting out? And practice that. And then how are we going to communicate with each other if we end up being separated? Those simple things of just like owning it ourselves and making it just like brushing your teeth, like for every day. And that's, if we can convey that, and that's going way back to Valerie's point about empowering kids, right? And getting kids are so, they can be like sponges with that. They'll take that home. There's a great training program that the American Red Cross offers. It's the Pillowcase Project. You know, it talks about the local hazards and even some mental health tips for kids. It's for 3rd through 5th graders. And it came out of Hurricane Katrina, and some smart volunteer sent it to the Walt Disney Company, and they decided to work together to collaborate on this training. So there's opportunities out there to frame this and to engage, you know, all different types of audiences. And I just leverage those opportunities when you see it, you know, and outside National Preparedness Month, right? There's 12 months of the year. There's always something going on. Make it fun. Make it part of every day. Leverage Valentine's Day, leverage holidays. Like preparedness shouldn't be about empowerment, right? It should not be a burden.
Get away from a big scary thing is going to happen and you're all going to be hurt. It's like, no, you'll be ready. And so we are almost at our time. I just wanted to share a couple takeaways that have emerged from our conversation. Andrea, I love what you said about the treasure hunt. You know, really walk your neighborhood and identify those ways to integrate businesses, see what they have, you know, to integrate them into your whole community plan in ways that they may not even realize they're doing that enhances their preparedness. And then another one that came out was listen to learn the business values of the organizations you want to engage with and figure out the language that's going to be most effective for them and what their incentives are to get them thinking about preparedness and what they need to do to collaborate in disaster. And then I think this one I really like is to get creative and personal even about showing what the value is in building these private these P3, why it's worth adding to a budget of a time and cash strapped business, why it's worth having continuity of operations plan in place and helping people understand how that ties into the preparedness and response efforts of your agency. And so, and just finally, you know, we want to, I mean, preparedness is, it should be about empowering, I think is what we're trying to say here, empowering you to be ready when the time comes, to feel like you know what to do and that you're part of the whole community solution. I think that's why it comes down across our country of that term, whole community. So, and I think part of what's going to make that even better is to get more people in this field of emergency management, have people who didn't think or didn't know that it could be for them to be for them. And there's some great programs that we talked about here with volunteering, other ones that are aimed at young people or people changing careers to get into the field. And so we have a survey here that you all can fill out if you want to get some input on it. Please do check out the Resiliency Initiative and Redefining Bravery for our amazing panelists, Andrea and Valerie, respectively. I thank you both so much for joining us today and everybody who participated in this call. Thank you for your great comments. I wish we could get to them all, but please keep the conversation going. You can reach out to any of us and we'd be happy to discuss further. So thank you both again for joining today.
Thank you, Charlotte. It was wonderful. Great seeing everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all. Yeah, we got